Hi, this is the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I hope you enjoy listening with me. The story starts a long time ago in a faraway kingdom where a castle sits on top of a dark hill. Inside the castle is a wicked queen who is very vain and loves to think of herself as a very beautiful queen. On her wall is a magic mirror that can tell her many things, but she only wants to know one thing. She only wants to know how beautiful she is. So she stands next to the magic mirror and says, "Magic mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And the mirror comes to life and tells her that she is indeed quite beautiful. But the most beautiful person in the kingdom is not her, but a young girl with beautiful skin and dark hair and red lips, and her skin is white as snow. Her name is Snow White. The queen is furious because she knows Snow White and knows how beautiful she is. But the queen is very jealous and wants to get rid of Snow White forever. But Snow White doesn't hate the queen. The Snow White doesn't hate anyone. She's a beautiful girl, and she's out gathering water for the day, looking at the beautiful birds and singing with them. She tells them that she loves spending time in the outdoors, but someday she hopes that a beautiful prince will come and rescue her, so that she can be married and be a beautiful princess with him. She looks in the well and says that she's wishing for a man to come and be her beautiful prince. But much to her surprise, an actual prince hears her singing and thinks that it's the most beautiful singing in the world. And when he peeks over the wall, he sees that she's also the most beautiful girl in the world, and he listens to her singing about her wish for a prince. So he comes up to the well and sings with her, but she's very surprised. She thought she was singing all by herself. We've all done that. But the prince sings with her, and she runs away because she is so surprised by a new person. She runs back into the castle and looks out the window to see the prince, and he's still singing at her. And she is very in love, for he is also very beautiful. And she thinks about how happy they'd be together. But Snow White is very shy, so she stays inside and thinks. And the prince goes on his way, not sad and not happy, just knowing that he saw her, and maybe he'd see her again someday. Meanwhile, the witch was planning how to get rid of Snow White. The evil queen summoned the huntsman to see her. The royal huntsman was the person the queen had to go hunt animals for food and for other reasons. But today she told the huntsman he would not be hunting animals. Today, she said, you will take Snow White out into the forest, and you will kill her, because I want to be the most beautiful in the land. And the huntsman was very sad to hear this, because he didn't want to hurt anyone, and he certainly didn't want to hurt the beautiful Snow White. But she was the queen, and he had to do what she said. So the huntsman took Snow White out into the woods. She was looking at all the beautiful flowers and trees, and he pulled out a knife, a sharp, dangerous knife, and his job was to kill her with it and take her heart back to the queen so the queen would know that Snow White was dead. And he snuck up behind her, and when Snow White turned around, she saw him with a knife, and she screamed, and she was frightened. But the huntsman did not kill her. He saw how wonderful she was, so he dropped the knife, and he told her the queen's wicked plan. He told her the queen wanted to kill Snow White, and he couldn't do it because it was wrong. But he told her to run away, because if the queen knew Snow White was alive, she would continue to try to kill her. But if the huntsman told the queen she was dead, then Snow White could live. So Snow White ran away from the huntsman into the forest, and it was a dark and scary forest. She'd never been alone in the forest before, and she tripped and thought she saw ghosts, and every tree looked like it might be a scary monster, even though it was just a tree. She was so scared because she knew the queen wanted to kill her, and she knew that she couldn't go home. Where would she go? She couldn't live in the forest. Snow White never knew anywhere to live except for the castle. She was very frightened, but she continued to run because the huntsman told her if she didn't, that she would be in great danger. And finally, Snow White fell down. She was so frightened she cried. She cried and wept because she didn't know what to do. Poor Snow White. I think we've all been frightened before. And no one was there to help her. But Snow White wasn't as alone as she thought, because in the forest were so many creatures, bunnies and deer and birds and raccoons and turtles, and all of them knew how kind Snow White was, because whenever they visited her at the well, she was always kind to them, and she knew that they were beautiful creatures, and they knew that if she was in trouble, they had to help her as well. So the bunnies and raccoons and the deer, they gathered around the crying girl, and they wanted to help because they knew she was kind. So one by one they gathered near her, lending their love and support, and when she finally saw them, she knew that they meant them no harm, and that the forest was not as scary a place as she thought, because she had so many friends, but she still had no place to stay. But the creatures, they held her up, and they helped her stand, and they seemed to have a plan. They walked through the forest and urged her to come with them, so she followed them. And she walked through the woods, and suddenly it wasn't as scary anymore, because she had friends with her, and friends can always make things less scary. But eventually, they came to a clearing in the woods where it wasn't scary at all, and there was a small little house. A house like Snow White had never seen before. The whole house was small. She went and looked in the windows and saw that it was a real house with a kitchen and everything else a house would have. Maybe this was a place she could stay. Maybe she could ask the people who lived here if she could stay here for a while. But no one was home. The animals knew that the door was open, so Snow White stepped inside. And even though it was so small and the ceiling was low, she could still walk around. And she couldn't believe it, because the house was so dirty. The dishes were piled up, and everything was dusty, and cobwebs were on things, and there was dirt everywhere. And Snow White thought, well, if this house is so small and dirty, it must be children who live here. That must make sense, because children can be very dirty. Even good children who want to be clean are sometimes dirty. And the house is so small that every chair is only big enough for a small child, and every table and bowl is only big enough for a child. But why would there be a house that only had children in it? Were there no grown-ups? Snow White knew that she had to help. Even if she couldn't sleep here, she knew that she could help clean up. So that's exactly what Snow White did. She decided that she would help clean up the house for the tiny children who lived in this house. And the animals helped, washing dishes and sweeping the floor and getting rid of all of the cobwebs, even though the cobwebs got all over the little birds. And Snow White said, I know work is hard, but sometimes work can be easier if you whistle. Whistling can make work go so much faster if you whistle a little tune that makes you happy. And she told him to whistle while you work. And even though the animals couldn't whistle, they loved her beautiful song and helped her clean the house. And bit by bit, the house got cleaner until you couldn't recognize the dirty house from before. The house was beautiful and spick and span. The pots were shining and the tables were clear. It was a beautiful house for tiny children, and Snow White realized that she was very tired. So she decided that she would go upstairs for a little while and maybe rest. When she got there, she saw there were 7 tiny beds with the names of the children. Sleepy, Doc, Bashful, Dopey, Happy, Sneezy, and Grumpy. What funny names for children! But since the beds were all next to each other, she could lay across a few of them and get some sleep. And that's what she did. In the beautiful, clean little children's house, Snow White felt safe for the first time today, and she fell into a deep, deep sleep. Back at the castle, the wicked queen received the box from the huntsman with a heart in it, so she assumed that the huntsman had killed Snow White, and she was very happy, for she thought that she was the most beautiful woman in all of the kingdom now. But to be absolutely certain, she went back up to her secret room. She was very vain, and she went again to the magic wall and asked it the same question it had asked before. Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And the mirror came to life once more and told her that once again she was quite beautiful, but the most beautiful woman in all of the kingdom was Snow White. And the queen was furious, because she said that that couldn't be true, because Snow White was dead. So if Snow White was dead, she had to be the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. And the mirror said, "No, Snow White is not dead. She is quite alive, and she is living, and she is still more beautiful than you, queen. She lives in a small house in the woods, and that is where you will find her." And the queen said, "But I have her heart right here in a box." And the mirror told her, "No, the huntsman could not kill Snow White. He took the heart of a pig and put it in the box for you." When the queen opened the box, she saw that it was true. It was not Snow White's heart, but that of a pig. And she was angry, and she knew that she had to kill Snow White herself, because everyone else she asked loved Snow White too much and wouldn't do it, because she was so lovely and so kind. So the queen knew she had to form a plan. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest was a diamond cave, a cave with beautiful riches of rubies and diamonds and gold. And mining this was a group of dwarfs, small little men with long white beards on most of them. And they would chip away at the rock to pull away the valuable diamonds, for they wanted to live the life of rich people. And they sang a little song just like Snow White did, only they didn't whistle. They sang, "Hi-ho, hi-ho, it's off to work we go." It was a song they sang to make the time go by as they gathered up their diamonds and their rubies. And each of them was not greedy, but only wanted the diamonds so that they could live comfortably and find good food. And at the end of the day, they were covered in dirt and soot and grime, for they had been working in a mine all day. And they decided it was time for them to go home to their house in the woods, not knowing that their house, the same house Snow White had found, had somebody sleeping in it. So they started on their way home, walking as the sun went down, singing that same song they had enjoyed before, but now singing, "Hi-ho, hi-ho, it's home from work we go." And they would whistle too now, for they were in the woods and the birds could hear them. They crossed over waterfalls. They crossed long paths, for the mine was not very close to their home. And they were happy, because walking is healthy. Everyone likes walking, and they knew that they would be home in time for dinner. So they continued to walk, all 7 of them, as the sun went down. As the dwarfs marched, they turned the corner into the clearing, and they stopped, stunned, because something had happened to their little house. It was clean on the outside, and it looked like from where they were standing on the inside too. What had happened? They hadn't cleaned their house. Was it something magic? Was it something else? They were very frightened and concerned. Although it was lovely to have a clean house, they didn't know how it got that way. So they carefully went towards the house. And when they got to the front door, they found it was open, and went inside. And just like they suspected, the house was clean. The dust was gone. The dishes were not piled in the sink anymore, but neatly stacked in the cupboards. The floor wasn't dusty, and the carpet had been cleaned. What was this? Some of them thought it was a good thing, but some of them thought maybe a witch had put a spell on their house. And when they looked, they saw a pot on the fire, because Snow White had started making food for them, but they didn't know what it was. And when the heat made the water boil, the steam came out of the top of the pot and made the club riddle and clank, and they thought surely the only thing in that pot was a wicked spell from a witch. And Grumpy, the angriest of the dwarfs, said, "See, it's a witch. It must be. There's no other way that this house could be so clean." But they realized that they were downstairs, and maybe the answer was upstairs. All of them looked. They looked around for a volunteer to go upstairs to see what was going on, but none of them was willing. So Dopey, the quietest dwarf, and the silliest dwarf, everyone said, "Dopey, you have to go upstairs. You have to find out if there's a witch upstairs." But Dopey didn't want to. He was very frightened. But they insisted. They pushed him up the stairs. And so slowly, Dopey walked up the stairs by one. They were making tiny creaks as he stepped. And he went inside. And he walked up the stairs. And he saw that the door to their bedroom was open. And he was very frightened. But he went inside. And he saw her there. He saw Snow White. And even though she was beautiful, he didn't know who she was or who she came from and why she was sleeping in his bed. So he was very frightened, and even though he didn't speak, Dopey let out a yelp, "Yo no!" And he ran down the stairs as fast as he could. He ran into all the other dwarfs at the bottom of the stairs, and they could see he was very frightened. But he couldn't tell them why, because he couldn't speak. So all of them wondered what was at the top of the stairs that had scared Dopey so much. So one by one, they walked up the stairs, prepared for anything, and individually they all walked into the room and saw Snow White sleeping there. And they realized that they didn't know who she was, but she wasn't a monster. She was a beautiful young girl, and they wondered how she got there and why she was sleeping on their bed. And Bashful said, "She's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen." But they were still very frightened to wake her. But then something happened. Snow White, sleeping in the bed, began to stir as if she was waking up, and the dwarfs didn't know what to do. So they hid behind the bed, wondering if she was going to cast a spell on them or if she was going to be friendly. And the dwarfs hid, frightened, waiting for Snow White to wake up. Snow White woke up, and she looked around, hearing a sound and wondering what made the sound. But it wasn't what, it was who. It was the 7 dwarfs who had come in on her. As she looked down at the foot of the beds, she saw their little eyes and noses peeking up over it. She was startled at first, but then saw how harmless they were, and smiled. "You must be the people who live here. But you're not children at all, are you? You're dwarfs, you're little men." The dwarfs emerged from behind the bookstand, knowing that she was no trouble, and they smiled at her. "Yes, this is our home. And who are you?" A little embarrassed, Snow White said her name was Snow White and that she was running from the Queen. But she was happy to exchange cleaning and cooking in exchange for being able to stay with the dwarfs. After all, she felt she already knew them. She looked at the one dwarf, who seemed to be in charge with glasses. "Well, I'll bet you're Doc," she said. "Well, I certainly am." And as she looked around, she was able to guess each of their names based on the names written at the base of their beds. And in looking at them, she saw one of the dwarfs hiding behind the bed. "You must be bashful," she said. He nodded, of course. "And happy?" "Well, yes, ma'am. They call me that because I'm so happy." And she looked over and saw one of the dwarf's eyes growing heavy. "Well, you must be sleepy," she said. He said yes. "And dopey?" Dopey nodded up and down. And the other dwarfs laughed. "Oh, he can't say anything. He doesn't speak, but he's pretty happy to see you." Snow White laughed at that. "And then what about the other two?" "Well, you must be Sneezy," she said. And the dwarf said, "Well, why do you think that?" And she said, "Well, I'll bet," but she was cut off, because just then Sneezy let out a tremendous sneeze, and everybody laughed. "Well, you're right. I am Sneezy after all." "Well, that only leaves one." And she looked over at Grumpy. He had his arms folded. He had nothing to do with this person. Girls were nothing but trouble as far as he was concerned. And she said, "Well, you must be Grumpy." And he said, "Oh, what of it?" And she said, "You don't have to be grumpy around me. I want to be your friend too." And the other dwarf smiled, but Grumpy was less convinced. Snow White could tell that it was going to take a while to get on Grumpy's good side. And she knew just the way. And it wasn't cleaning. She said, "I'm happy to clean, and I'm also happy to cook for you. I know how to make cookies, because everyone likes cookies, and cake and food. But I can also make gooseberry pie." And all of the dwarfs' eyes, even Grumpy, lit up at this. "Gooseberry pie," they said. "Why, that's our favorite." Of course it was. Snow White knew how delicious gooseberry pie was. She said that she'd make them a gooseberry pie in exchange for letting her stay there for the night. Even Grumpy couldn't say no to this. So it was agreed. Snow White would live with the seven dwarfs and clean while they were away and while they were working in the mine, and she would make them dinner and take care of the home while they were gone, and in exchange she could stay there safe from the wicked queen, and everyone was happy. Well, maybe not Grumpy, but pretty much everyone else. Of course, before anyone could eat dinner, Snow White demanded one thing. "Show me your hands," she realized after thinking about the dwarfs working in that coal mine all day. Every dwarf put out their hands, and every dwarf had filthiness all over their hands. Nobody likes to wash their hands. I know I don't. But Snow White insisted. "Look at these hands. They're filthy. There'll be no gooseberry pie picked up with these dirty hands. I want each of you to go out and wash your hands all nice and spick and span so that you can have a delicious meal." But the dwarfs didn't even know how to wash their hands. It had been so long since they'd done it. So Snow White showed them the trough of water out in their yard with the pump. "Wash your hands in that, and get them all nice and clean with soap." So the dwarfs went out, and each of them was afraid of the water. It had been a long time since they'd put their hands in water or washed their hands. They didn't have a mother to tell them to do it. But they dipped their fingers gingerly into the water and realized it wasn't going to hurt them. So they started washing their hands one by one and getting soap on it one by one. All of them, that is, except for Grumpy. Grumpy thought that it was a terrible idea, that she was changing who they were, and Grumpy didn't want to wash his hands with the rest of the dwarfs. But the dwarfs knew that if he didn't wash his hands, maybe none of them would get any gooseberry pie. So the other 6 dwarfs grabbed him and put him in the water all up to his neck to make sure that he was nice and clean. And then they were all ready for gooseberry pie. But on the other side of the forest, the wicked queen was making her plan to hurt Snow White. She went down into her own dungeon, where she made a magic spell. A wicked crow looked on and was frightened, not knowing what she was about to do. She put together the ingredients for a wicked brew, and then dipped one apple into it, knowing that the apple would be filled with poison. She knew that if she got Snow White to bite the apple, then surely the poison wouldn't cause Snow White to die, and then she'd be the fairest of them all. She pulled out the apple. It looked beautiful, even though she knew its deadly intent. The apple was kind of like the queen in that way, beautiful, but very wicked and deadly on the inside. The queen knew that she couldn't take the apple to Snow White the way she looked, so the queen made a second spell just for herself. She cast it, and her beauty faded away, and in place of the beautiful queen was a wretched old beggar woman with a hunched back and a wrinkled face. Her nose was big and crooked. She knew that Snow White wouldn't think twice about hurting this old woman, because Snow White was so kind, she would be kind to a beggar. And so the wicked queen, and now looking like an old beggar woman, put the apple into her basket and started heading into the woods. The crow was frightened, for the crow had no idea that the wicked queen could turn herself into a witch in this way. But she walked out into the darkness, and the crow knew that the witch was going to try to kill Snow White one final time. The next morning, the dwarfs all woke up and decided it was time to go to work in the mine again. They had a good bellies full of food from the night before and a good night's sleep because Snow White had done such a good job of making the house nice and clean for them. They all got their boots on and prepared to sing their morning song as they went back to work again. Hi ho, it's off to work we go. Always the same song, because it made them happy. And they knew that today was unlike other days, because when they got home, the house would be clean again, and they'd have food waiting for them. All of the dwarfs loved this new idea. And as they left, one by one, Snow White took off the hat of each dwarf and gave them a kiss on the forehead. Silly old Dopey, he even ran around the back of the house so he could get kissed on the head twice, and Snow White let him. But Grumpy wanted nothing to do with Snow White. But secretly, even Grumpy realized that it was nice to have somebody nice in the house for a change, even though he'd never say it out loud. So one by one they marched back to work, across the waterfall, over the hill and through the woods, until they got to work. While they were gone, Snow White decided to start making that gooseberry pie she promised. She gathered all of the ingredients together, started making a lovely crust. But as she did, she thought that she'd make a very special gooseberry pie with the best gooseberries, because the dwarfs had been so kind to her, letting her stay in their home. She worked so hard that she barely remembered any of her other chores that day, just working on making a delicious gooseberry pie for the dwarfs. But as she worked, somebody approached the house. It was the old beggar woman, who was secretly the queen. She knew that Snow White was in the dwarf's house, so she decided to pay a visit in the guise of the old woman. As she approached the window, she could smell the gooseberry pie and see Snow White inside, cheerfully making her pie. Snow White was startled when she heard the old beggar woman speak. "Making a pie, are we, dearie?" "Oh, yes," said Snow White. "I'm making a gooseberry pie for the dwarfs who live here. It's their absolute favorite." Playing the game, the witch said, "Oh, my dear, gooseberries are delicious, but if you want to make a truly delicious pie, you should make an apple pie. That's the kind that everyone loves. Would you like to see some of my delicious apples?" The witch held up her basket with admittedly very beautiful and enticing apples. Snow White wasn't sure, because she knew how much the dwarfs enjoyed their gooseberry pies, but at the same time she wanted to be kind. "Well, come in," she invited the beggar woman in. "Have a seat. Let me get you a glass of water." The witch was happy because Snow White was playing her game. She sat down and drank the water, thanking Snow White for her kindness, even though the witch planned to repay this kindness with wickedness. "Oh, thank you, dear. Even if you don't make an apple pie, why don't you take one of my delicious apples? I'm sure it would make you feel better. Here, try this one." She pulled out the most delicious-looking apple. Of course, that was the apple with the poison in it, and Snow White didn't know. So, Snow White, not wanting to be rude to the old beggar woman, accepted the gift and looked at the shiny, shiny apple. Should she eat it? Certainly, she wanted to. Snow White bit into the apple, and the witch looked on, hoping that she would take a big bite. As soon as she did, Snow White felt ill and dizzy, and she fell to the ground. The poison took effect right away, and as she fell, her hand fell to the ground, and the apple rolled away. Snow White was sick and unconscious, and the witch laughed and laughed, because she knew that she had beaten Snow White. This is what she wanted, for her to defeat the beautiful young girl. The witch smiled as she picked up the apple and put it away, looking at Snow White on the ground. She would have to go back and turn back into the beautiful queen so she could ask the mirror one more time the question, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And she knew that this time the mirror would tell her the truth, that she was the most beautiful in all of the kingdom. She couldn't wait, but at the same time she laughed as she looked over Snow White, for she was truly an evil, wicked queen. But they weren't alone, not entirely. The deers and the rabbits of the forest, all of them saw what had been done, and they knew that Snow White needed help. So they, one by one, raced off to get the dwarfs. The animals raced over the waterfall. The animals raced through the forest, and they tried to find the dwarfs as quickly as they can, to let them know that there was danger for Snow White. They didn't need to talk to let them know of the danger. The animals ran as quick as they could, jumping over holes, climbing up hills, taking shortcuts even though they weren't safe, because they wanted to get the dwarfs to Snow White as soon as possible before the witch had a chance to leave. Finally, they arrived where the dwarfs were working on their coal mine. They looked up and saw the animals. What could possibly be happening that so many animals are here? At first, the dwarfs were confused. They didn't think about Snow White. They were only thinking of why these animals would be here. The birds flew around them, the deers pushed them, and the dwarfs were confused, thinking that something was wrong, but they didn't know what had to happen. The bunnies and the squirrels, they chipped at their feet and pushed them towards the house. Doc, being the smartest of the dwarfs, was the first to figure it out. If they're pushing us towards home, that must mean that something's wrong with Snow White. So all of the dwarfs yelled, "We have to get home. We have to protect Snow White. Something's wrong. Help us, animals." And the animals did. One by one, the dwarfs jumped onto the backs of the deers and started racing as fast as they could, over the waterfall, down the steep cliff that was too dangerous to walk under normal circumstances. But this was not a normal circumstance. Each time they came across a barrier that they would have to walk home on their normal day-to-day walk, the animals would jump, getting them home much faster than they could have gotten home walking or even running. But would it be fast enough? Would they get home fast enough to save Snow White? The dwarfs were very concerned and very worried, and they looked at each other with fear in their eyes. "We have to help Snow White. No matter what's going on, we have to help her. We have to make sure that she's safe, because she's a wonderful person and kind, and we care for her very much." So we raced back to the house, and they were close before they turned that final turn and came across their house. Before the dwarfs could see anything, they saw the wicked old hag in front of the house, and they knew that she must be up to no good. "Go get her," they said, and so immediately they started chasing the wretched old queen in her disguise. They chased her up the hill, trying to find out how they could save Snow White, who was laying inside. She cursed at them, "You'll never catch me," but they chased her up the stormy mountain near the dwarf's castle. When she reached the top, she saw a giant boulder, and although it was too strong for her to push, there was a log which she knew she could use as a lever. So the witch put the log against the rock and tried to push with all her might, to push the rock down, rolling down the hill to crush the dwarfs as they ran up to stop her. And the storm had started, with lightning and rain all around them. Suddenly, a lightning bolt hit right where the witch was standing, and it broke the rock she was standing on, so she fell, and the giant rock fell after her, falling hundreds of feet, knowing that she could never survive. The dwarfs looked down and were saddened, but they knew that they had to go back and save Snow White. So they ran back to the house, looking for where she was, and they found her. Poor Snow White. She was on the floor, with her hands at her sides, the apple rolled next to it. The dwarfs were so bad, they couldn't bear burying her, so instead they built her a casket made out of gold and glass, with all the money they had made from the mining. They put Snow White in the coffin, so that they could come and visit her, and that the animals of the creature could come and visit her as well. And so she stayed, every night, and the winter came, and the snow fell, and the creatures would still come in the winter to look at her in her glass coffin. Then, one spring morning, the dwarfs were visiting, when they heard a strange sound. A horse pulled up, and the prince, beautiful Prince Charming, came up. But he saw that she was the same beautiful girl he had seen before, and he thought she was gone. So he opened the casket, and looked at her ruby red lips, and leaned down to kiss her. And because the curse said that it could be reversed by love's true kiss, he kissed Snow White, and she woke up to look at the beautiful prince. And she was so happy to be around all of her dwarf friends, and also the handsome prince. So he put her on his horse, and they rode away to his kingdom, where she would be the most beautiful woman in all of the kingdom forever. And they lived happily ever after. The end.